Top 10 Most Hated Golden Age Celebrities of All Time. Celebrity doesn't always earn love, and for some classic Hollywood stars, fame only magnified their worst traits. Rather than being remembered for talent alone, their legacies became defined by harm, cruelty, or betrayal that surfaced over time. Although the Golden Age is often remembered as elegant and magical, the truth behind the camera was far darker than the image audiences were sold. Behind many celebrated icons stood figures whose reputations eventually collapsed once their behavior came to light. Testimony from victims and evolving social standards exposed actions that studios once buried. What makes these disgraced stars so compelling isn't simply that they were disliked, it's that millions adored them at the same time, noted a longtime Hollywood historian. These weren't merely controversial personalities. They were celebrities who projected flawless public personas while those closest to them suffered in silence. Their stories are especially striking because studios invested enormous effort into hiding the truth. Publicity teams didn't just sell movies, they actively concealed behavior that would have ended careers overnight. Abuse, misogyny, betrayal, and even violence were carefully erased from public view, explained a former studio publicist. When you realize that Joan Crawford's loving mother image was engineered by the same system that suppressed abuse allegations later revealed in Mommy Dearest, the scale of manipulation becomes clear. Even more unsettling is how many of these stars died with their reputations intact, only for the truth to emerge years later through memoirs and historical reassessment. The sharp contrast between praise in life and condemnation in death shows just how powerful Hollywood's protective machinery once was. Today, we're revealing 10 of the most reviled figures of Hollywood's golden age, stars whose reputations were ruined not by irrelevance, but by exposure. From beloved entertainers who hid parental abuse to respected filmmakers who betrayed friends to survive. These stories uncover the darkness behind Hollywood's brightest lights, and we begin with one of the most dramatic collapses in film history. Joan Crawford, Hollywood's monstrous mother. To audiences in the 1940s and 50s, Joan Crawford symbolized ambition, glamour, and resilience. Rising from poverty, she won an Oscar for Mildred Pierce and sustained a long career in an industry notorious for discarding aging actresses. That polished image masked a private reality so disturbing it eventually consumed her legacy. Crawford's downfall didn't begin gradually, it detonated after her death, explained a Golden Age film historian. Her daughter Christina's 1978 memoir, Mommy Dearest, shattered the myth of a devoted mother and replaced it with allegations of alcoholism and abuse. While studios promoted Crawford as a model parent through staged photos and awards, Christina described a childhood of terror, nighttime beatings, cruel punishments, and obsessive surveillance. Crawford had long been known as difficult and combative, including her famous feud with Bette Davis, but it was Mommy Dearest that permanently destroyed her reputation, transforming her into a symbol of Hollywood cruelty. The book portrayed a household ruled by fear, fueled by narcissism and rage. The 1981 film adaptation starring Faye Dunaway cemented this image in pop culture. The infamous no-wire hangers scene turned Crawford into a grotesque caricature. Ironically, the film's exaggerated tone allowed some to dismiss the abuse as fiction, even though multiple accounts supported Christina's claims. Crawford's younger children disputed Christina's version, creating a divided family narrative that complicated her legacy. Still, the controversy never restored her standing. As the historian noted, Crawford's name now triggers Mommy Dearest before any discussion of her films. Her story exposes how thoroughly studios fabricated identities. MGM and Warner Brothers promoted Crawford as a loving mother while quietly managing her outbursts behind the scenes. This wasn't occasional spin, it was decades of calculated deception. Her posthumous collapse remains one of the clearest examples of Hollywood's illusion breaking apart. Bing Crosby, the White Christmas Nightmare. For generations, Bing Crosby's voice defined warmth and comfort. His recording of White Christmas became the best-selling single in history, and his films portrayed him as the ideal gentle father, calm, wise, and kind. Behind that soothing image, however, lay a far more troubling reality. According to cultural historians, the divide between Crosby's public persona and private behavior was extreme. His son, Gary's 1983 memoir, Going My Own Way, exposed a childhood marked by fear, discipline, and violence. Gary described routine beatings, emotional distance, and rigid control. Weekly weigh-ins allegedly determined punishment, with weight gain resulting in humiliation and physical abuse using belts and weighted canes. To the public, Crosby was the relaxed, pipe-smoking symbol of decency. Privately, his son portrayed him as cold and obsessed with corporal punishment. The revelation stunned fans because it so completely contradicted the image that made Crosby beloved. What made the damage irreversible was how deeply that wholesome persona was embedded in American culture. Once exposed, the contrast between White Christmas warmth and private cruelty permanently altered how Crosby is remembered. And this pattern, idolized image versus hidden reality, continues with the next figure on our list.
To the public, he was the kind priest of Going My Way, the calm father figure of classic cinema, and the warm family man seen on television. Those comforting images collapsed when reports emerged describing a father who allegedly beat his children severely over minor issues. The true shock wasn't only the abuse claims, but how completely they contradicted the persona Bing Crosby sold to America. According to historians, this wasn't a rough man acting consistently, but a gentle icon allegedly hiding cruelty at home. Although some of Gary Crosby's brothers disputed details, his younger brother Lindsay later confirmed many of the accusations. Before his death in 1989, Lindsay described repeated beatings and openly labeled his father brutal and monstrous. These revelations forced audiences to reassess not only Crosby himself, but an era that often excused violence as discipline. What his children described went far beyond strict parenting and met any modern definition of abuse. Historians note that Crosby's case exposed how Hollywood could manufacture identities that bore no resemblance to reality. The man welcomed into millions of homes as the perfect father was, by his children's accounts, emotionally cold and unsafe. Though Crosby's reputation never fully recovered, his Christmas songs remain seasonal staples, creating an unsettling contrast between nostalgic warmth and disturbing allegations. That tension leads directly to another story of a beloved figure, undone by private choices. Our next subject is a director whose talent was unquestioned, but whose betrayal permanently scarred his legacy. Few filmmakers matched Elia Kazan's ability to extract raw, emotionally powerful performances. Masterpieces like On the Waterfront, A Streetcar Named Desire, and East of Eden secured his place among cinema's greats. Yet one decision during America's political paranoia reshaped how history would remember him. Film historians often point to his 1952 testimony before the House Un-American Activities Committee as the moment everything changed. By naming suspected communists, including close friends, Kazan protected his career at devastating cost to others. After briefly belonging to the Communist Party in the 1930s, Kazan was summoned to testify during the blacklist era. Though he initially refused to cooperate, he later returned and named
8 former group theater colleagues. This act wasn't viewed as political survival, but as personal betrayal, historians explain. Those he identified faced immediate blacklisting, lost careers, and long-term hardship, while Kazan continued working uninterrupted. What angered many most was his lack of remorse. Rather than apologize, Kazan publicly defended his actions, even buying a full-page newspaper ad to justify himself. He doubled down years later in his autobiography, insisting he made the correct choice. When he received an honorary Oscar in 1999, the audience split sharply between applause and silence. That moment perfectly captured Hollywood's unresolved divide over his legacy. Even decades later, his testimony still overshadowed his artistry. The controversy resurfaced nationwide after that ceremony, with filmmakers debating whether genius could outweigh betrayal. Kazan's story became a lasting example of how personal choices can permanently stain creative achievement. Adding to the complexity, On the Waterfront itself appears to justify informing, mirroring Kazan's own actions through narrative. Historians argue the film reads as self-defense, framing betrayal as moral courage. Despite calls to separate art from artist, resentment toward Kazan never faded. While Kazan fell from grace through a single act, the next figure declined through a mix of scandal and politics. Few entertainers ever reached the universal admiration once enjoyed by Charlie Chaplin. His Little Tramp crossed language and borders, making him cinema's first global superstar. As actor, director, writer, and composer, Chaplin defined early film artistry. Yet the man once adored worldwide would ultimately be driven out of America. According to historians, politics and relationships with teenage girls sealed his downfall. In the 1940s and 50s, Chaplin's image collapsed under paternity lawsuits, controversial marriages, and accusations of communist sympathy. One marriage alone raised alarms. He was 54, his wife just 18. These scandals combined into a perfect storm that turned public opinion sharply against him. Chaplin's repeated relationships with very young women became increasingly disturbing to audiences. While age gaps existed in early Hollywood, historians note that Chaplin's pattern suggested predatory behavior by modern standards. Allegations of control and abuse further eroded his reputation. Slowly, the charming romantic figure transformed into a deeply problematic icon. Chaplin's image suffered a major blow in 1943 when actress Joan Barry brought a paternity lawsuit that dragged his private life into public view. Although later blood tests proved he was not the child's father, courts rejected the evidence and ordered him to pay support, leaving many to believe he had shirked responsibility despite scientific proof.
At the same time, Chaplin drew increasing political scrutiny as his film's social critiques began to feel threatening in the tense climate of the Cold War. While he never joined the Communist Party, his refusal to deny leftist sympathies outright made him an easy target during a period of aggressive anti-communist paranoia, historians explain. Earlier works like Modern Times and The Great Dictator were reinterpreted as politically suspect as Cold War fears escalated. These growing suspicions, combined with personal scandals, reached a climax in 1952 when Attorney General James McGranary revoked Chaplin's re-entry permit while he was overseas. Instead of contesting the decision, Chaplin chose permanent exile, settling in Switzerland after 4 decades in America without citizenship. His forced departure marked a dramatic fall for a man once adored as the face of American entertainment. A filmmaker who had shaped Hollywood for a generation now found himself unwelcome in the nation where he built his legacy. Though he returned briefly in 1972 to accept an honorary Oscar, the damage to his reputation proved lasting, reshaping him from a universally loved icon into a deeply divisive figure. Chaplin's story reveals how swiftly admiration can turn to rejection, even for cultural legends, historians note. His artistic brilliance remains unquestioned, yet his personal behavior, particularly involving very young women, ensures his legacy remains permanently conflicted and debated. While Chaplin's downfall blended politics and scandal, the next figure earned infamy almost entirely through cruelty toward colleagues, building a reputation that eclipsed even his undeniable talent. From the polished fantasy of Dr. Dolittle to refined screen charm, Rex Harrison projected elegance and wit. In films like My Fair Lady, he embodied aristocratic sophistication that brought him international fame and an Academy Award. Away from the spotlight, however, Harrison developed a reputation as one of Hollywood's most unpleasant collaborators. His consistent mistreatment of others earned him the label of the industry's reigning tyrant, according to journalists who spoke with his contemporaries. Fans dubbed him Sexy Rexy, but co-stars knew him as a tormentor. He was accused of cruelty toward Audrey Hepburn, arrogance toward peers, and habitual misogyny that left lasting impressions on those who worked beside him. His conduct during My Fair Lady became infamous, with reports that he openly mocked Hepburn's singing ability and treated her with disdain. Harrison routinely reduced female co-stars to tears, while Julie Andrews later called him the rudest man she ever encountered. Such descriptions were echoed by nearly everyone who shared a set with him. Unlike occasional Hollywood tempers, Harrison's behavior appeared calculated and constant, targeting those with less power while sparing those above him. Observers noted his cruelty followed a clear hierarchy. He treated stars better than extras, men better than women, and directors better than crew, revealing contempt rooted in status rather than stress. Stories of his misconduct extended into shockingly personal territory. Allegations included public humiliation, degrading language toward Samantha Eggar, and behavior so offensive it reinforced his image as intentionally abusive. His private relationships mirrored his professional conduct, with multiple marriages marked by claims of emotional mistreatment and infidelity. This pattern suggested character consistency rather than momentary volatility. What stands out most is how little his behavior harmed his career. Despite widespread awareness of his cruelty, Harrison continued receiving top roles and accolades long after others might have been discarded. His success illustrates how talent once shielded stars from accountability in Golden Age Hollywood. Studios prioritized box office returns over human dignity, tolerating behavior that would be unacceptable today. Though Harrison's reputation was established early, the next figure's legacy has shifted more dramatically over time, transforming a musical icon into a more troubling subject of reassessment. Gene Kelly's dazzling athleticism and radiant smile made him the embodiment of cinematic joy. Classics like Singin' in the Rain built an image of tireless positivity that concealed a far harsher reality on set. Behind the scenes, Kelly's perfectionism reportedly crossed into cruelty, especially toward young female performers. Dance historians describe him as a relentless taskmaster who pushed co-stars beyond physical limits. Debbie Reynolds' experience became the most famous example. Barely 19 and lacking formal dance training, she was expected to match seasoned professionals under grueling conditions that left her feet bleeding and her body exhausted. Kelly showed little patience for her inexperience. Reynolds later recalled months of non-stop rehearsals, constant criticism, and emotional breakdowns fueled by fatigue and pain.
What makes this treatment especially disturbing is the power imbalance involved. As both director and co-star, Kelly controlled Reynolds' career trajectory, turning artistic demands into an abuse of authority. Historians argue this pattern reflects a broader issue in classic Hollywood, where young actresses were subjected to extreme pressure by powerful men. What was once framed as dedication now appears far more troubling when examined through modern standards. Other collaborators confirmed similar experiences. Sid Charisse and Leslie Caron both described Kelly as relentlessly demanding, pushing performers to exhaustion in pursuit of flawless results. Kelly's legacy remains complicated because his methods undeniably produced masterpieces. Singin' in the Rain remains one of cinema's most celebrated musicals, raising difficult questions about whether greatness excuses suffering. Modern reassessment increasingly rejects that justification. Behavior once dismissed as artistic rigor is now recognized as workplace bullying, with the well-being of performers finally weighed alongside artistic achievement. Kelly's image has been steadily re-evaluated as former collaborators speak more openly and modern standards of workplace conduct evolve, historians explain. Behind the cheerful dancer audiences adored was a perfectionist whose intensity often crossed into cruelty toward those with less power. While Kelly's reputation is rooted in his demanding professional behavior, the next figure earned lasting hatred largely through personal beliefs that clash sharply with today's social values. John Wayne stands as one of America's most complicated cultural symbols. For decades, he represented a rugged vision of masculinity through westerns and war films that portrayed him as strong, moral, and patriotic. That carefully built persona has unraveled in recent years as his views on race, politics, and indigenous peoples have been revisited through a modern lens, turning a once revered icon into a polarizing and widely criticized figure. Wayne's legacy became especially controversial due to his outspoken politics and racism, according to a Western film historian. Long a political lightning rod, his reputation suffered a major blow when a 1971 Playboy interview resurfaced in which he openly endorsed white supremacy. His hostility was also evident at the 1973 Oscars, where he reportedly had to be restrained from forcibly removing Sacheen Littlefeather after she spoke on behalf of Marlon Brando. That Playboy interview remains one of the most damaging records of Wayne's beliefs. In it, he expressed overtly racist views toward Black Americans and defended the displacement of Native peoples as justified. These statements were neither subtle nor ambiguous, historians note, making them difficult to dismiss as mere products of their era. Because of the bluntness of his words, separating Wayne the actor from Wayne the man has become increasingly difficult. Although his conservative politics were widely known during his lifetime, the full extent of his racial views received far less scrutiny until decades later. The renewed circulation of the interview forced a deeper reckoning with his beliefs and the values his screen image once symbolized. Wayne's case is especially fraught because his on-screen roles became deeply intertwined with American identity itself, historians observe. For many viewers, he didn't just portray heroes, he embodied national strength and virtue. Highlighting his racism raises uncomfortable questions about who that vision of America included and who it excluded. The Oscar night confrontation with Sacheen Littlefeather has gained renewed attention within this reassessment. Her dignified protest against Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans was met, reportedly, with Wayne's furious reaction. Seen alongside his published views, the incident reflects not just disagreement, but a visceral rejection of marginalized voices challenging his worldview. Debates over Wayne's legacy have intensified as institutions bearing his name face scrutiny. In 2020, California's Orange County Democratic Party formally called for John Wayne Airport to be renamed due to his white supremacist, anti-indigenous, and anti-LGBT views. His fall from near-universal admiration to cultural controversy marks one of Hollywood's most dramatic reversals. As public awareness of systemic racism and indigenous rights have grown, Wayne's own words have made his heroic image increasingly troubling for modern audiences. While his films remain historically significant, the man behind them has become a deeply divisive figure whose legacy still fuels debate.
While Wayne's notoriety stems from personal ideology, the next figure earned infamy through professional cruelty, using power to destroy careers while imposing her moral and political judgments on the industry. Hedda Hopper, Hollywood's most feared gossip columnist, held enormous influence without ever becoming a star herself. From the 1930s through the 1960s, her syndicated column reached tens of millions and could elevate or end careers overnight. Rather than merely reporting on Hollywood, she actively shaped it to reflect her conservative values. For those who crossed her, Hopper was less a journalist than a threat, media historians explain. A failed actress turned columnist, she wielded gossip as a weapon to shame, expose, and control. Actors feared her not just for what she printed, but for what she hinted she could reveal. After her acting career stalled, Hopper reinvented herself by exploiting insider access and industry secrets. Her column eventually reached over 35 million readers, granting her extraordinary leverage. She understood that public image was Hollywood's lifeblood, and she used that knowledge to enforce moral conformity. Hopper's influence was amplified during the Blacklist era, when she enthusiastically supported HUAC investigations. She pressured studios to blacklist suspected communists and praised those who cooperated. Her personal feuds were infamous, including her long-running hostility toward Katharine Hepburn, whom she mocked relentlessly. Hopper was especially feared within Hollywood's LGBTQ community. At a time when exposure meant career ruin, she used insinuation and coded language to threaten closeted actors. Historians note that she weaponized homophobia, trading silence for gossip or compliance. What set Hopper apart was her openly political mission. She used celebrity secrets to attack liberals, promote conservative ideology, and police behavior across the industry. By turning gossip into political ammunition, Hopper became not just a columnist, but a culture warrior whose legacy remains one of fear and damage. Unlike contemporaries such as Luella Parsons, who prioritized spectacle, Hedda Hopper pursued a distinctly moral and political mission, the historian explained. She cast herself less as a reporter and more as Hollywood's self-appointed watchdog, guarding against perceived immorality and communist influence. By the 1960s, shifting social values and looser studio control weakened Hopper's grip on celebrity culture. Her death in 1966 closed a chapter when a single columnist could dominate an entire industry through rumor and implication. Hopper is remembered as Hollywood's most feared outsider, the historian noted. Decades later, survivors of the Golden Age still describe her as a destructive force, willing to ruin careers in service of her own crusades. Although Hopper earned her infamy through professional ruthlessness, the next figure alienated audiences through ego and personal views that eroded his once massive appeal. Once adored across America and Europe, particularly in France, Jerry Lewis embodied slapstick brilliance with his elastic face and manic energy. His success with Dean Martin and later solo fame made him one of Hollywood's biggest comic stars. Over time, that affection curdled into widespread resentment. Lewis increasingly came to be seen as arrogant and dismissive, a shift driven by what one journalist described as unchecked ego and misogyny. Known for volatility and self-importance, Lewis grew harder to work with as his career progressed. After splitting from Martin in 1956, total creative control only amplified his temper and contempt for collaborators. Calling himself the total filmmaker, Lewis rejected criticism and belittled dissent. This arrogance spilled into interviews and public events where hostility toward journalists became part of his public persona. His reputation deteriorated fastest after repeated attacks on female comedians, the journalist observed. Statements in 1998 and again in 2013 dismissing women's ability to be funny made him appear sexist and painfully out of step. As women like Tina Fey and Amy Poehler reshaped comedy, Lewis's refusal to reconsider his views deepened the backlash. His unwillingness to apologize or evolve further damaged his standing. Lewis's long-running Muscular Dystrophy Association telethon complicated his legacy. Though it raised billions, disability advocates criticized his framing of patients as objects of pity rather than empowered individuals. This contradiction defined his later image, the journalist noted. He was both a major fundraiser and a symbol of outdated attitudes toward disability. When the MDA removed him as host in 2011, the organization offered thanks without explanation. Lewis never publicly addressed the split, though reports suggested lingering bitterness. In his final years, Lewis remained honored for past achievements, but largely sidelined from contemporary entertainment. His death in 2017 prompted renewed praise for his comedy, alongside frank acknowledgement of his personal failings. Lewis's fall of grace stands out because it was largely self-inflicted, the journalist concluded. Unlike others, his decline came from his own words and conduct rather than later revelations. While Lewis damaged his reputation through arrogance, the final figure on this list became feared through volatility and intimidation, leaving a legacy as troubling as it was influential. Few performers matched Frank Sinatra's cultural reach as a singer, actor, and icon. His artistic impact still shapes music and celebrity long after his death.